Hi, I'm Philip with G6 Technology Services. Today we have a Dell Inspiron 15 3000 series. We're going to be changing the hard drive to an SSD, and then we'll be using a Dell recovery image to reload Windows and all the drivers onto the machine. Then we'll use a SATA to USB adapter to copy the user's files back. Let's get started. So the first thing we'll need to do is to power off the machine. Okay, now that the machine's off, we'll want to unplug our power. I'll just put this off to the side. Then we'll want to remove our battery. Okay, now that's out. I'll put this off to the side. And then I'll just press the power button again just to remove any residual power that might still be in there. Okay, so in order to get to the hard drive compartment, we're going to have to remove the keyboard, the optical drive, which is right here. Then we'll have to take this bottom panel off. There's a lot of screws here. So it's important to keep track of where all of these screws go because they're not all the same size and it might not go back together the right way if you mix any of them up. So to start, we have to pry the keyboard up. So we'll use a black plastic pry tool. And the way these work, there are clips and you can see them at the top of the keyboard. About here, 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 and here. And you just have to free those and then it slides up and out. Sometimes it's helpful to have more than one of these. So you can use one to hold your position while you work on the next. Okay, once the top clips are released, you should be able to just gently pry the keyboard up, and then it just comes out of the slots at the bottom. So these are the tabs that hold it in. And then once we have the keyboard out, there's a connector right here. This is the keyboard connector. And we want to flip this little bar up. So once this bar is flipped up, it releases the keyboard connector and it just slides right out. So I'll go put the keyboard off to the side. So Dell actually has really nice service manuals you can download from their website that tell you the exact position of every screw. So since there are so many of them, I like to get the manual so you can tell which screws need to come out and which don't. So in this case, it looks like we have 4 in the middle and 1 off to the side. And I do see those. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it looks like they're all the same. So I like to use these little plastic dishes to keep all the screws in, to keep them all in one place. So we'll go ahead and grab our Phillips screwdriver and I'll see what size fits best in here. It's a little bit small. That's a 00. Yeah, that fits pretty well. 0. Yeah, that's a better fit. That's a number 1. So we'll go with our Phillips number 1 bit. And we'll just start removing these screws. And it's always a good idea to just make sure that they do all look like they're the same size, and in this case they are. So I'm just going to put the lid on our little jar, and then we'll just set that off to the side. And I've got a few more of those in here, so we'll just use those to put the rest of our screws in, because there will be quite a few. And there's also a connector that we have to remove. It's the optical drive connector. It's right here. So that's the same type of connector as the keyboard. It just has this little black flap that you just have to pry up. And then once the little black tab is up, the connector will just kind of pull out. Okay, and then we'll flip the machine over. And then they did want us to remove the optical drive, so we'll go ahead and do that. It's held in by 1 screw. And then to get that optical drive out, there's a little slot right here. You just insert something in there and just push the optical drive out. So I always like to use plastic tools so we don't scratch the plastic. So now we can see the optical drive is coming out. So that optical drive just slides in. I'll show you that at a different angle. So it just slides right out. And then the screw that goes in it, I'll just go ahead and put that back so I don't lose it. I don't want to use up one of these little containers just for 1 screw, so I'll just put that screw back in the hole to keep track of it, and I'll go put this off to the side. Okay, now we're ready to start taking out our bottom case screws. So here there are 3 different sizes of screws that you can tell since they're the same number, and the circles look a little bit different. So all the number 4s, all the number 5s and 6s are different sizes. So there are 8, I believe, number 4. Yeah, there are 8 that are the same size that are around the perimeter. So let's see, that'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then after that, we have 3 that are in here. There's 1, 2, 3. And then after that, we have 2 that are up here, which is right here and here. So I'll just be removing all these screws and then we'll put them in the cup for each size screw. Okay, now that we have all of our screws out, the next part is to pry away the bottom case from the top. And it does take a little bit to get it started, but once you do, there are clips holding it on, they just all separate. So once you get a few of them, it gets easier. But in the meantime, it does take a little bit of effort to get it started. So if you're going to be prying, again, use a plastic pry tool, don't use a metal one, because that will scratch the plastic. So it's good to try and find a place where it's already separating a little bit. So that works if you just use the optical drive. So that was one of the clips, and if you just kind of pull up on the optical drive a little bit, it'll pull that clip, and then you can just run your pry tool. And again, like we were doing with the keyboard, I find it easier to use two and have one to hold your place, because otherwise if you let go it snaps back down, and then use the other one to pry and just keep switching positions. So this is our one tricky area, because we didn't have anything over there. This slot is stopping the clips, so this part didn't get lifted. So we'll try and come from the battery side. We'll see if that'll, yeah, that looks like it works. Didn't see that, so I was just going along the battery compartment to get this corner started. And then once it's started, we should be able to get it the rest of the way, hopefully without too much of a problem. Well, I say that, but you want to be careful and not drop the tools. No, but you want to be careful and not put too much pressure on that and snap it off, because there's nothing else holding that corner together. So we'll try and just give it an even pressure from both sides. See see if we can get that to separate. There we go, finally. So, now we have our back panel, which should be free. There we go. And this is the cable that we had to unplug on the other side, so now you see why we had to do that, because it wouldn't come off otherwise. So I'm just going to put this tray off to the side. And I'll use this opportunity just to flip it over real quick and see if anything falls out. Nope. Sometimes those little plastic pieces break off. So now you can see inside our computer we have our hard drive. This is where the optical drive goes. And we have our this board here for the SD card, audio, USB, and our fan. And then our other ports down here, we have a couple of speakers and our battery connector. This looks like a wireless module, our RAM. So this would be a good opportunity to upgrade or change out your RAM if you needed to do that. There was a little plastic piece. It's a good idea if you hear anything rolling around in there, try to get it out now, because otherwise it'll roll around inside and you won't be able to get back to it, or it might get in the fan and cause a weird grinding noise. So we'll go ahead and take our hard drive out. So this just has 4 screws at each corner, and then we have our connector right here that we'll unplug. So I won't bother putting these in a container because we're going to be putting them right back in. Okay, now that our screws are out, this hard drive just lifts up. Be careful not to pull it too hard because the cable is still connected, so that's the next thing we're going to do is unplug that. And this will just be a standard SATA, mobile SATA cable or connector, so it just pulls out. You want to be careful when you do that not to put too much pressure on the motherboard side of the connector. There we go. So that's out. Here's our hard drive. So now we just need to transfer our bracket. So we'll get our new SSD. So here we go. Then I'll put all this stuff back together. I usually will put the old hard drive back in the container so the customer can take it with them just as a backup. But I'm not going to put it in there right now because we need to use that to transfer the data back. So I'm just going to put this box off to the side. So now what we need to do is line up the connectors so we know which way the bracket goes. So once your drive is facing the same direction, then we'll start taking screws out of this bracket. There's just 2 on each side. And then our drive will just come right up out of this bracket. So we'll just put that off to the side, and then we'll put our new drive in. And then we'll use the same screws to secure the new SSD into the bracket. And this SSD is thinner than the hard drive that was in there, so the holes don't quite line up. You have to hold the SSD up off the bottom of the bracket a little bit to get it to line up. And these are all the same size, so it doesn't make a difference which order they go in. Okay, and we'll go ahead and put our drive back in the computer. So we'll plug in our SATA connector. Make sure it's seated all the way. You shouldn't be able to see any of the contacts. And we'll just place the drive back inside the computer. And we'll start putting our hard drive bracket screws back in. Okay, and there's our new SSD securely installed in our laptop. So we'll go ahead and start reassembling it now. So I'm just going to put this out of the way. And now we have our bottom cover. So we need to make sure when we put this in that our optical drive cable is going through the correct slot so that we can plug it back into the top side of the board. So when you put that back on, just make sure that that goes in the correct place. And there's not really any good way to show you that, it's so tight in there. But you can check, if you open it back up, it should be poking out where in front of the connector where it belongs. So that is in the right place. So we'll go ahead and just push this back together. And make sure that all the clips snap into place. If you don't do a good job at this step, then you'll have weird looking little openings and bulges around the outside, and it won't look normal, so we don't want to do that. Okay, that looks like it's securely attached now. So now we'll just go ahead and start putting our case screws back in. So it's pretty easy to keep track of them if you sorted them by size and location. So there's two in this section, 3 in this section, and then 8 around the perimeter. So if you have all the bottom case screws all in one place, then it's pretty easy to figure out where they all go. So we'll put our 2 screws back in. We'll put our 2 screws back in this battery compartment area. And when you're tightening these down, there's a lot of plastic in here. It's not all metal, so we don't want to over tighten them and crack the plastic. They are going into threaded inserts, so that's nice. They're not self-tapping, but we still don't want to over tighten them, so just make it snug. But we also don't want them to fall out, so you do want to make sure they're snug enough, but just don't go crazy with it. And we'll put our other screws in. that go in this optical drive opening. Okay, that's all of our bottom case screws back in. So now we'll put our optical drive back. And remember, we saved this other screw in here, so I'll go ahead and remove that now. And then the optical drive will only go in one way, so if you do put it in the wrong way, it just won't go. That's as far as it goes. So just flip it around, let it drop in, just press it into place. We have our one single screw that goes back to keep that in. And then we can go ahead and reattach our keyboard. We're done with this, so we'll just move this out of the way. So before we do that, we have to reattach our optical drive cable. So this connector has two little ears on the side of it. So you just push it kind of straight down, you just set it into the socket, and you should feel it kind of, it'll feel like it's in there. And then you just push the little tab down, and then if you notice on the blue part there's a black line, that should be hidden under the black tab. And now if you just kind of gently tug on that, it feels like it's in there. So we're good there. And then our keyboard is the same type of connector. So we'll go ahead and get that connected before we put the keyboard in, because it's a lot easier. And then this connector, it says up, so it lets you know which way it goes in, because it does look the same on both sides, but only one side has contacts on it, so if you put it in upside down, it's just not going to work. So we'll go ahead and put it in with the up side facing up. And again, that just kind of sits into that connector, and you'll be able to feel when it's in there. If it doesn't feel right, then just take it out and try again. And then you can tell that it is in there because there's this white line which will line up with the edge of the connector. So once it's in there all the way, let me see if I can hold this in place. See, the white line lines up with the connector. And then once we push the bar down, give it a quick little gentle tug test. Now that white line is resting right below the bar. So that is in there securely, doesn't want to come out. So now this keyboard, we start putting it in by the bottom where these little tabs are. It just wedges under there. So once it's wedged under, then we can start pushing the tabs in on the top. Okay, and we're fully reassembled. So we'll stick the battery in, and then we'll start reinstalling our operating system. Okay, and then we have our restore drive. Dell actually has on their website operating system recovery images, so you can download those, and this should restore the computer to factory settings, so it'll have Windows 10 with all of the correct drivers already on it, which really makes things a lot easier. So We could also, depending on your situation, you could clone the old hard drive onto the new SSD. In this case, we're not going to, because this customer had some other issues besides that they wanted to upgrade to an SSD with some malware. So we're not going to risk that. We're just going to start fresh, and then I'll just manually copy over any pictures and other documents after they've been scanned. So to start, we'll just plug our flash drive into one of our USB ports, and then hit our power button. And I can't remember on these if it's F10 or 11 or 12, one of those, but it should say on the screen for a boot menu. So we'll want to do that. Okay, it was F12. So we'll hit F12 when it boots up, and then we'll select our flash drive. And we'll just wait for that to start up. Okay, we'll go ahead and start this. Okay. And we'll just wait for it to install. Okay, well, we have our standard Windows setup now, and I have to say I love those Dell recovery images, because using that, now I don't have to manually reinstall all the drivers and QuickSet and all the other special software. It just comes with it. So we'll go ahead and get this set up, and then I'll copy all the customer's data back, and then we'll just do a quick wrap up. Okay, we can eject our restore disk now that we don't need it anymore. You can see we have our 500 gig SSD showing up. So now what we're going to do is use our SATA to USB adapter to plug in our old hard drive and copy some of the user's data back. Okay, we've got the user's data transferred back. I've gone ahead and unplugged our old hard drive, and I'll pack that up in the SSD box and give it back to the customer so they can hang on to it as an archive. We've gone through all the updates, done driver updates, Windows updates, so this computer is ready to go. I'm just going to give it a quick clean, and then after that it'll be ready to give back to the customer.